The enclosure was built to hold gods. That was not an exaggeration. Queen Riva had personally overseen every detail of its construction 7 years ago, back when Kale was still young and the Empire was still learning what it had on its hands. Reinforced quantum steel formed the outer shell, thick enough to survive a direct missile strike. 16 layers of energy shielding hummed constantly underneath, each one calibrated to a different frequency so nothing could slip through all of them at once. 40 armed guards rotated on 3-hour shifts, hand-picked from the best soldiers in 6 systems, trained specifically for one assignment: keep Kale inside. Not because Kale had ever tried to escape. He hadn't. Not once in 7 years. He ate when they fed him, rested when the lights dimmed, and rose when the Queen called. He was the perfect weapon. Obedient, devastating, and completely without ambition of his own. Or so everyone believed. Which was exactly why General Mara could not find the right words when she called the Queen that morning. She didn't have to. Riva arrived at the enclosure within 20 minutes of the alert and saw it herself. The restraints were on the floor. Not snapped, not melted, not torn apart in some violent explosion of force. They were simply undone. Each locking mechanism disengaged in the correct sequence, from the inside, as if someone who knew exactly how the system worked had calmly and quietly taken their time with it. Kale had not broken out. He had walked out. Mara stood just behind the Queen's left shoulder, which was where she always stood, and she kept her voice low out of habit rather than any real hope that it would soften the news. He left on his own, she said. The footage shows him working the locks for about 40 minutes. None of the guards noticed because none of them ever thought to watch for that. They were watching for an attack, not a departure. Riva did not respond immediately. She walked the perimeter of the empty enclosure slowly, her robes dragging across the floor, her crimson eyes moving across every surface. She was looking for something. A clue maybe. A reason. Some piece of evidence that would make this make sense. There was nothing. No blood anywhere. No damage to the walls or the floor. No sign that anything violent or dramatic had happened here at all. Just an empty space where the most dangerous creature in the Empire used to sleep. She stopped in the center of the enclosure and stood still for a moment. Her generals and advisors were gathered outside the barrier, watching her through the shielding, waiting. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. When Queen Riva went quiet like this, the smart ones held their breath. How long? She finally asked. Mara checked the timestamp on her display. Approximately 9 hours before the shift change caught it. We lost another 2 hours confirming it wasn't a system glitch before alerting you. So roughly 11 hours total. 11 hours. Riva let that settle. In 11 hours, Kale could have covered an enormous amount of distance depending on how he traveled. If he had help, even more. She turned that thought over carefully. Help. Did someone help him? Did someone get to him somehow, slip through all those layers of security and whisper something in his ear that made him decide to leave? Or had he simply decided on his own? Both possibilities were deeply uncomfortable for different reasons. She walked back toward the exit, and her voice when she spoke again was calm and measured and very, very quiet. Her generals had served her for years and they all knew that quiet was the thing to be afraid of. Screaming meant anger. Quiet meant something colder. Every hunter we have, she said. Every scout, every informant, every contact across all 6 systems. I want them activated within the hour. She stepped through the enclosure doorway and her advisors parted to let her through without being asked. Pull favors if you have to. Spend whatever is necessary. I want eyes on every transit hub, every docking port, every remote colony and backwater station within range. She paused just outside the doorway and turned slightly, not enough to look back, just enough to make sure her words landed properly. And when you find whoever convinced my beast to leave his post, she said, bring them to me alive. I don't care what condition they're in. I don't care what it takes. Alive and breathing and capable of answering questions. That is the only instruction that matters. Nobody asked what would happen after the questions were answered. Nobody needed to. What Riva did not say out loud, what she kept locked behind her expression as she walked back to her ship, was the part that actually unsettled her. It wasn't the escape itself. Kale was powerful, yes, but he had been recaptured before in training exercises, and the Empire had resources that could track almost anything across almost any distance. What unsettled her was the 40 minutes. 40 minutes of carefully, quietly, patiently working through every lock in the correct order. No rage. No panic. No desperation. Just patience and intention and a decision that had clearly been made long before that night. Kale had planned this. And in 7 years of watching him, studying him, using him as the sharpest edge of her empire's power, Riva had never once considered that he was capable of wanting something badly enough to plan for it. That was the thought she carried back onto her ship. That was the thought that sat beside her as she gave her orders and watched her hunters scatter across the stars. Not where did he go, but what, in all the world she had shown him through conquest and war and devastation, had he finally decided he wanted enough to go find on his own. The scout ship broke out of warp quietly, which was by design. Lieutenant Cole had been doing this long enough to know that you never announced yourself above an unknown target zone. You came in soft, you came in low, and you figured out what you were dealing with before you let anyone know you were there. HFY was not impressive from orbit. It was the kind of world that cartographers marked and then immediately forgot about. Small, dry, sitting at the far edge of mapped space like something the galaxy had misplaced and never bothered looking for. The surface was mostly flat with patches of scrubland and a cluster of structures near the northern flatlands that qualified as a settlement only if you were being generous. Maybe 200 people down there, Cole estimated. Farmers, mechanics, traders who preferred distance from authority. The kind of humans who moved to the edge of everything on purpose. He brought the ship down slow and parked it behind a ridge about a mile from the settlement. Standard procedure. Go in on foot, observe first, report back. The Queen's orders had been simple. Find Kale. Confirm location. Do not engage. Wait for further instruction. Cole had done missing asset recoveries before. Twice in the last 3 years. Both times the asset had been found damaged, cornered, dangerous. Both times it had taken a full tactical unit to manage the situation safely, and even then people had gotten hurt. Kale would be different. Kale would be worse. Cole had reviewed the beast's file on the journey over and had spent most of that time feeling quietly grateful that his job was only observation. He moved through the scrubland on foot with 2 of his scouts flanking him at a distance. The settlement was quiet in the way that small places are quiet in the middle of a working day. Distant sounds of machinery, someone somewhere doing something with metal, the low hum of a generator. Normal sounds. Nothing that suggested a legendary war beast was anywhere in the vicinity. Then Cole came through a gap in the scrubland and stopped. The repair shed was a simple structure. Corrugated walls, an open front, tools hanging on hooks, an old engine block sitting on a wooden platform off to the side. The kind of shed that belonged to someone who fixed things for a living and had been fixing things for a long time. There were parts everywhere, organized in the particular way that looks chaotic to everyone except the person who owns them. And in the dirt just outside the open front of that shed sat Kale. Cole's brain did something strange in that moment. It sort of stalled. Because what his eyes were sending back simply did not match anything in his experience or his expectations. Kale was enormous. Even sitting, even relaxed, even completely still, the beast was a presence that took up space in a way that went beyond just physical size. 8 feet of dense layered muscle covered in hardened natural scale that Cole knew from the file could deflect standard weapons fire. Limbs built for both speed and destruction. A jaw that had reportedly bitten clean through reinforced steel during a combat demonstration 3 years ago. He was sitting in the dirt like a dog waiting outside a shop. His posture was loose. Comfortable. There was nothing in his body language that suggested tension or alertness or the coiled readiness that every piece of footage Cole had seen of him in the field always showed. He looked, and Cole would spend a long time afterward trying to find a better word for it, he looked at ease. And crouched right beside him, close enough to touch, was a human. Young guy. Maybe late 20s, hard to say exactly. He was lean in the way that people who work physical jobs get lean, not from trying but just from doing. His work shirt had probably been a solid color at some point but was now so thoroughly covered in engine grease that the original shade was anyone's guess. He had a welding tool in one hand and was using it with steady, careful movements on a deep gash that ran along Kale's left flank. The wound looked old enough to have started closing on its own but bad enough that it needed proper attention. The human was giving it that attention with the focused, quiet manner of someone who had done this kind of work 1,000 times and trusted their own hands completely. He wasn't scared. That was the thing Cole kept coming back to as he stood there unable to move. Not performing bravery, not gritting his teeth through fear, not trying to appear calm while internally falling apart. He was just genuinely, completely unbothered. Working. Focused. Present. Easy big guy, the human said, not looking up from what he was doing. His voice was low and even. Almost done with this section. You're gonna want to hold still for another minute. Kale made a sound. Low from somewhere deep in his chest. Cole had heard recordings of Kale vocalizing in combat situations, and the sound had been the kind of thing that made your body want to run before your mind caught up. This was nothing like that. This was something that, if Cole heard it without any context at all, he might have described as something close to a sigh of patience. The sound of something large and powerful choosing to stay still because it had decided the person asking was worth listening to. Cole stood at the edge of the scrubland and did not move for 30 full seconds. He counted them without meaning to. His 2 scouts had gone equally silent somewhere behind him. None of them spoke. None of them reached for a weapon or a communicator or did anything at all except stand there and watch a young human mechanic treat a wound on the most dangerous creature in 6 star systems like it was just another Tuesday. Eventually Cole remembered that he had a job to do. He reached slowly for his communicator and clicked it twice. The signal that meant confirmed location, stand by. Then he kept watching because he genuinely could not look away. The ship came in low and it came in fast and it blocked out the sun above HFY 7 the way a storm cloud does right before everything goes wrong. Jake had been under the belly of a broken cargo hauler when it happened. He heard it before he saw it. A deep sustained pressure in the air, the kind that you feel in your chest before your ears fully register the sound. He rolled out from under the hauler and stood up and put a hand above his eyes against the light and watched the ship descend. It was not like any ship he had seen dock at HFY 7 before. The colony got traders, occasionally a government supply run, once in a while someone passing through who needed repairs. Those ships were functional and worn and built for practicality. The ship was built to make a point. It was dark and broad and the design of it was aggressive in a way that went beyond just military. It was the kind of design that said we did not come here to talk first. It settled about 200 meters from his shed and the landing struts hit the ground with a weight that Jake felt through the soles of his boots. Then the ramp came down and 40 soldiers walked out in formation. Jake had a moment, standing there with engine grease on his hands and a wrench still hanging from his belt, where he genuinely considered whether he had done something wrong. He ran through the last few weeks quickly in his head. Unpaid supply tab at the Eastern Depot. Borrowed a neighbor's generator and hadn't returned it yet. Nothing that warranted 40 soldiers. Then Queen Reva walked down the ramp and the soldiers arranged themselves around her and Jake understood that this was not about him at all. Or at least it hadn't been until about 4 days ago when a massive wounded creature had dragged itself out of the scrubland behind his shed and collapsed in his yard. Reva was tall. Taller than he expected, though he wasn't sure what he had expected exactly. She wore deep colors, dark red and black, and she moved with the particular stillness of someone who had spent so long being the most powerful person in every room that stillness had become their natural state. Her crimson eyes swept the yard and found Kale immediately and something moved across her face that was there and gone too fast to read properly. She walked toward them and her guards moved with her and Jake noticed that none of the guards were looking at him. They were all watching Kale. Hands near weapons, weight shifted forward slightly, the posture of people who were professionally afraid and managing it through training. Reva stopped about 10 feet away. She looked at Jake for exactly 1 second, the kind of look that measures and categorizes and files away, and then she looked past him. "Step away from my property," she said. Her voice was controlled and even and carried the specific quality of someone who had given orders their entire life and had never once had to raise their volume to be taken seriously. Jake looked at Kale. The beast was sitting still, watching Reva with an expression Jake had come to recognize over the past 4 days as simple calm attention. Then Jake looked back at the Queen. Then at Kale again. He didn't move his feet. "He came to me hurt," Jake said. His voice came out steadier than he felt, which surprised him a little. "Showed up in my yard 4 nights ago with a gash down his side that was bad enough to cause real problems if it didn't get treated. I treated it. I wasn't gonna leave him like that." Reva looked at him for another moment. Not angry exactly. More like someone encountering an unexpected variable and deciding how much attention it deserved. Apparently the answer was not much because she moved her gaze past him again almost immediately. She took 1 step closer to Kale and when she spoke again her voice dropped in a way that made it more private, which given 40 soldiers standing in the yard was a strange thing to manage but she managed it. "Explain yourself," she said. There was a long pause. Jake watched Kale the way he had watched him for 4 days, reading the small signals he had slowly learned to recognize. The slight shift in posture. The way his breathing changed. He was not agitated. He was not preparing for anything. He was thinking or something close to what thinking looked like from the outside. Then Kale stood up. He rose to his full height slowly and the effect of it was immediate and physical. Jake felt it even though he had watched Kale stand up dozens of times in the past 4 days. Several of the guards took a half step back without seeming to realize they had done it. One of them made a small sound that he probably would have been embarrassed about later. Even Reva, whose composure had not shifted once since she stepped off that ramp, went very still for just a moment in the way that a person does when their body reacts faster than their self-control can catch it. Kale looked at Reva. And then he spoke. Jake had heard Kale make sounds before. Low rumbles, something that might have been acknowledgement, once something that might have been amusement. He had not heard him use actual language before. The words came out in something old and structured, a tongue that had weight to it the way very few languages do, like each word had been chosen by someone who understood that words could be weapons or walls depending on how you used them. He did not run, Kale said. The words were slow and deliberate and very clear. Every species that has ever seen me has run. Every soldier, every commander, every creature with enough intelligence to understand what I am. They all run. He paused. This one did not run. This one knelt down in the dirt next to me and asked where it hurt. Jake stood very still. He remembered that night. The sound outside that had woken him at 2 a.m. Going out with a flashlight and finding something enormous and wounded lying in the scrubland at the edge of his property. He remembered kneeling down because it was easier to see the wound from that angle and saying out loud, mostly to himself, "Okay, where's the damage, let me see it." He had not thought about it as a meaningful act. He had just been trying to figure out what needed fixing. Apparently it had meant something entirely different from the other side of it. The silence that followed Kale's words was the kind of silence that has texture to it. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The wind pushed a little dust across the yard and that was the only sound in the world for a long moment. Riva stood completely still and looked at her war beast and her expression was unreadable in the way that very deep water is unreadable. You could not see the bottom of it. You could not tell what was moving around down there. Jake exhaled slowly and waited to find out what happened next. Riva's jaw tightened and something shifted behind her eyes. It was small and quick and if you weren't watching closely you would have missed it entirely. But it was there. A flicker of something that sat right on the border between disbelief and anger, the particular expression of someone who has just been told something that contradicts a belief they have held for a very long time and has not yet decided how to respond to that information. She stood with it for about 4 seconds. Then she made her decision. "Take him," she said. She didn't gesture. She didn't point. She didn't need to. Her guards had been with her long enough to know that him meant Kale and take meant now and the tone of her voice meant that this was not a moment for hesitation or questions or anything except immediate movement. 4 of them stepped forward. Not the standard perimeter guards. These were the ones who stood closest to her, the ones who traveled with her personally, the ones she brought when she expected things to get complicated. Each one was large even by the standards of their species, covered in tactical armor that had seen real use, moving with the practiced coordination of soldiers who had fought together through enough difficult situations that they no longer needed to communicate during one. Veterans. The real kind, not the ceremonial kind. They moved toward Kale in a formation that was designed to manage large and dangerous targets. Spread wide enough to limit options, close enough to act simultaneously. Clean and professional and completely confident. Jake stepped in front of them. He did it without thinking about it, which was the honest truth of it. He didn't weigh the decision or talk himself into it or find some reservoir of courage he didn't know he had. He just moved, the same way you move when something is about to fall off a shelf, the same instinct that makes you reach out before your brain has finished forming the thought. One moment he was standing beside Kale and the next moment he was standing in front of him and his boots were planted in the dirt and he was looking at 4 armored soldiers who outweighed him by a significant margin and were not slowing down. He had no weapon. He had a wrench on his belt but he didn't reach for it because he wasn't stupid enough to think that would help anything. He had no armor. He was wearing the same work shirt he'd had on for 3 days, still stained, still worn through at the left elbow. He had nothing except the fact that he was standing where he was standing and he had decided not to move. "You're gonna want to stop right there," he said. His voice came out calm. He wasn't sure how. His heart was doing something fairly dramatic inside his chest but his voice came out like he was telling someone their engine timing was off. Flat and certain and not particularly interested in argument. One of the guards laughed. It was a short sound, not mean exactly, more the reflex of someone who has encountered something so far outside their expectations that laughter is the only immediate response available. A human. Standing in the dirt. No weapon, no armor, no backup, telling 4 elite soldiers of the Queen's personal detail to stop right there. Jake didn't move. He kept his eyes on the lead guard and kept his feet where they were and didn't say anything else because he had already said the thing and repeating it wasn't going to add anything useful. The lead guard stopped laughing after a moment. He looked at Jake with the expression of someone who has decided to simply move an inconvenient object out of the way and reached out toward Jake's collar. What happened after that was very fast. Jake felt the air change beside him. That was the only way he could describe it afterward when he tried to put it into words. The air changed the way it changes right before lightning hits, a pressure shift, a sense of something enormous committing to motion. Then Kale was moving and the world rearranged itself around that fact. He didn't roar. He didn't telegraph it. He moved the way very large and very powerful things move when they stop choosing to be slow, which is to say all at once and without any of the warning signs that smaller creatures rely on. He came through the space between Jake and the guards like weather moving through a gap in hills. Not frantic. Not chaotic. Just committed and inevitable and completely without hesitation. The 4 guards went down. Jake watched it happen and still had trouble afterward reconstructing exactly how it happened in what sequence because it was over before his eyes could properly track it. There was movement and then there were 4 veterans of 100 campaigns sitting in the dirt of his yard looking up at the sky with the specific expression of people who are not badly hurt but are genuinely struggling to understand what just occurred. It had taken less than 4 seconds from start to finish. Kale stood over them for a moment. Not threatening. Not posturing. Just standing, the way you stand when you have done a thing and the thing is finished. Then he turned and walked back and positioned himself beside Jake again. Shoulder to shoulder or as close to that as the size difference allowed. He looked at Riva. Riva looked back at him. Her face had gone very still in the way that faces go still when the person wearing them is doing a great deal of internal work that they are not ready to show on the outside yet. Her 40 guards had gone equally still around the yard. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The 4 soldiers on the ground were picking themselves up slowly and quietly and not making eye contact with anyone. He didn't ask me to do that, Kale said. His voice was quiet and unhurried. He was simply willing to stand. That is enough. Jake exhaled through his nose and said nothing. He was looking at the Queen. She was looking at Kale. And somewhere in that silence, something was shifting that Jake could feel but not yet name. Nobody spoke for a long time. The yard was completely still. The guards who were back on their feet had arranged themselves back into formation, but something about the formation felt different now, looser, like the confidence that holds a unit together had developed a small crack somewhere and everyone could feel it but nobody was acknowledging it. The wind moved across the scrubland and pushed a little dust around and that was the only thing in the world that seemed willing to do anything at all. Riva looked at Jake. She looked at him the way she had not looked at him before, which was to say she actually looked at him, not the quick categorizing glance from earlier that measured and filed and moved on. She looked at him the way you look at something when you are trying to understand it rather than just identify it. He was not impressive by any standard she normally applied to the people who ended up matching in her world. Ordinary height. Ordinary build. Dirt on his boots that had been there long enough to dry in layers, the accumulated evidence of a person who worked with their hands every day and did not think much about appearances. His shirt was beyond saving. There was a small cut on his left hand from some job earlier in the week, already scabbing over, the kind of minor damage that working people collect without noticing. He was looking back at her without dropping his eyes and without any performance of bravado either. He wasn't trying to seem unafraid. He simply appeared to actually be unafraid, which was a different thing entirely and considerably harder to fake. Then she looked at Kale. Her war beast. 7 years. She had watched him level fortified positions that her army had assessed as untakeable. She had watched enemy commanders physically shake when his name was mentioned in briefings. She had watched entire ship formations change their tactical decisions in real time because Kale was on the field and nobody wanted to be the one who had to engage him directly. He had never been defeated. He had never retreated. He had never, in 7 years of absolute reliability, done a single thing that surprised her. Until 9 days ago. And now he was standing in the dirt yard of a human mechanic on a colony world that didn't even have a proper name, and the way he was standing there, close and still and present, communicated something that Riva found genuinely difficult to look at directly. It wasn't submission. It wasn't confusion or damage or some temporary aberration that would correct itself with time. It was settled. It was chosen. It was the posture of something that had made a decision from a place of complete clarity and was entirely at peace with the consequences. "You would throw away everything," she said to Kale. Her voice was quiet and there was something underneath the words that was not quite anger anymore. Something that had been anger earlier and had since become something more complicated. "For this." Kale looked at her steadily. "I throw away nothing," he said. "I have simply found something worth standing next to." Riva was quiet. She let those words exist in the air for a moment without responding to them, which was itself unusual. She was not someone who needed time to find responses. She turned the words over and looked at them from different angles and understood that arguing against them was not going to produce anything useful because they were not a position being defended. They were just a description of something true. She looked at Jake again. "Do you understand what his loyalty means?" she said. It came out less like a question and more like something she needed to say out loud to see how it sounded. What it will cost you. Jake glanced over at Kale beside him. There was something easy and natural in the way he did it, the glance of someone checking in with a person they have already decided to trust. Then he looked back at Riva and his expression was thoughtful but not worried, the expression of someone who has already done the internal work on a decision and is now just living on the other side of it. I'll figure it out, he said. 3 words. No elaboration. No list of reasons or explanations or attempts to justify himself to her. Just the simple flat confidence of a man who meant exactly what he said and didn't feel the need to dress it up. Riva held his gaze. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 full seconds of looking at this ordinary human in his ruined shirt standing in the dirt of his ordinary yard on his ordinary colony world at the edge of everything, and something moved through her expression that her generals would have struggled to name because they had not seen it on her face before. Then she stepped aside. It was a small physical movement. Half a step to the left, her robe shifting with it. But the meaning of it was enormous and everyone in the yard understood that immediately, guards and soldiers and Jake alike, because Queen Riva did not step aside. That was not something she did. In 20 years nobody who served her had seen her physically yield space to anyone or anything. She did it now. The beast's loyalty is his own to give, she said. The words came out quietly, almost like she was saying them to herself first to make sure they were true before she said them to anyone else. Then her voice came up slightly, taking on the particular carrying quality of an official pronouncement. Record it. Kale's pledge stands. The shift that went through her guards was subtle but real. Adjustments in posture. Exchanged glances. The quiet recalibration of people absorbing new information that changes the shape of something they thought they understood. Nobody argued. Nobody questioned it. Jake exhaled slowly and looked at Kale and Kale looked back at him and neither of them said anything because there wasn't anything that needed saying right at that moment. Riva walked back to her ship without rushing. Her guards fell in around her in formation and the ramp received her and the ship sealed itself and lifted with the same heavy authority with which it had arrived. Jake stood in his yard and watched it go up through the atmosphere until the sky closed back over the place where it had been and HFY returned to its normal quiet. Inside the ship, as the planet shrank in the viewport to a small dusty dot and then to nothing at all, General Mara moved to stand beside the Queen. Mara had served Riva for 11 years and had learned over that time which silences invited conversation and which ones did not. This one was on the border. She decided to risk it. "You're letting a human keep your war beast, my queen?" she said carefully. Not a challenge. Just a gentle attempt to understand. Riva watched the empty space where HFY had been for a moment longer before she answered. "No," she said. Her voice was even and certain in the way it always was, but there was something underneath it that was newer and more considered. "I'm acknowledging that my war beast kept his honor." She turned from the viewport and her crimson eyes were clear and settled. "There is a difference." Mara thought about that for the rest of the journey home and did not entirely disagree.